Welcome. If you're a woman who has a sense that there's more out there for you, you're in the right place. I'm Whitney Baker, host of the Electric Ideas podcast. Somewhere along the line of work and kids, life carried on, but I lost track of my truth. I'm on a reflective journey, and that's what this podcast is all about. Each week, I interview a woman who is lighting her own path and offering others hope. Before our conversation ends, we'll share a reflective question for you to explore. Sometimes all we need is a jolt, a fresh idea, an aha moment that connects us to a sense of possibility. This, my friends, is what I call an electric idea. Welcome back to Electric Ideas. I'm your host, Whitney Baker. I am so excited to welcome certified leadership coach and consultant Tracey Gee to the show today. We are diving into her book. It's called The Magic of Knowing What You Want. This was one of those books that deeply speaks my language. It has tons of practical wisdom for anybody who's perhaps in a transition or feeling stuck or uncertain on how to move forward. She offers beautiful guidance on connecting with our desires and then a practical framework that really helps us actually step towards those desires and not just stay in thinking and dreaming mode. In her book, Tracey draws insight from her extensive experience across workshops and speaking engagements and coaching sessions. She's a certified facilitator in 4 frameworks: Gallup-Clifton Strengths, Working Genius, Enneagram, and Cultural Intelligence. And her diverse roster of clients includes UC Berkeley, Firm Foundation, Altimed, Nomi Network, Coca-Cola, Amazon, and the Miami Heat. I'm super passionate about self-awareness for women, and it's really what's at the root of Tracey's work. I know you're going to have tons of great takeaways from this episode. Let's get into it. Hi, Tracey. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Whitney.
I actually want to start with a quote that resonated a lot with me from the book. You said, "Your desires are not self-indulgent. They are breadcrumbs leading you toward the work, the relationships, and the experiences the world needs from you." One aspect of your book that I love that you talk about, because it's one of my favorite topics, is that it's not selfish to name, understand, and move towards your desires. But so many people, especially women and the women I see in my communities, struggle to see their desires as valid and valuable. So can you start with your experience of seeing women maybe struggling to even feel like it's worth it to try to articulate and move toward their desires?
Of course. I mean, that's so real. I think that's what was so fascinating and drew me to this whole topic is because I think that's, when you listen to mostly men talk about this, you're like, well, just figure out what you want, go do it, go live your passion. But the more women I talk to, I was like, that sounds good. I can maybe even agree with that, but it is a lot harder than it seems. I think when we're I think we're so great at being attuned to what everyone else around us needs and is feeling. And that's such a strength of women. But then the downside that can come with that is that you lose sight of what you want. And I think it's like you said, to your point, it's not helped when the narrative on top of that is like, this is not okay. This is frivolous. This is self-indulgent. This is just selfishness. I ran into that when I was beginning to try to explore this more for myself. And I've talked to so many women who that's their first reaction. That's the tape that's in our heads. And I think a lot of that is being socialized as women to be able to say like, no, 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 your value is you showing it for other people, or you being helpful for other people, or you supporting everyone else. But what you want, like, no, that's inconvenient. That's not okay. And so many of us have these stories.
Yeah. I'm glad you brought up that kind of seems like male attitude of like, you want it, you go get it, and how it can be a little bit more complex for women. Your explanation of that kind of stark double standard we see between men and women and how they express their desires really stuck with me from the book. You said sometimes that when men express their desires, they're seen as visionaries. And when, I was just like, dang, that's kind of true. I see this man being like, I'll go do this. And then women, when they finally do express their desires, they sometimes feel dismissed or selfish. Can you talk a little bit about how you hit up against your own conditioning? You mentioned that just before, but I'd like to hear a little bit more about how you bumped into that when you were starting to reattune with your personal desires.
I love that word of conditioning. I think that's such a good way to put it. Well, I tell a story in the book about trying to experiment with my desires, trying to do one thing every day for 40 days just because I wanted to, which I don't know how that sounds to people. To me at the time, it sounded like this is what I needed to focus on and try. And I don't know, maybe it sounds like so simple, but it really actually was, again, harder than it seemed. And I remember one day being in my backyard. The thing that I wanted to do that day was plant some tomato plants. And while I'm doing it, I'm like feeling guilty because I'm thinking to myself, like, oh, if this person knew I was doing this, maybe they'd be like pissed. Maybe they'd be like annoyed, like, or mad, like, what are you doing? Why are you wasting your time? And I was like, whoa, where is this coming from? So it was like a moment where I sort of stepped back from myself to, like when you sort of watch yourself and you're like, wow, that is kind of an intense thought to have. Like, I'm just planting tomatoes. And yet in my head, I'm already thinking about these other voices that are like, oh, you're probably just being really selfish by even thinking about this. What's wrong with you? And can't you think of better ways to spend your time? Or shouldn't you be off like trying to help somebody? And I was like, oh my gosh, like seeing the mismatch between what I'm doing, which is just like, okay, this is like not that big of a deal. Just planting tomatoes with this like very strong inner voice and narrative. It was like, wow, where is that coming from? Why do I have that in my head? And what do I want to do about that? I think that was, kind of a moment to wake up and say, like, I don't think that's what I want. I don't think that's how I want to relate to this thing that's a part of me. It's an extension of myself, is like what I want and my understanding of my desires. And I don't think I want to relate to myself with this kind of harshness and criticism and judgment. Like, I don't think that's going to be helpful. So I didn't quite know what was on the other side of it, but I remember in that moment thinking like, yeah, I don't know that this is like the healthy way that I want to talk to myself and interact with these parts of my own life.
That is so real. I'm so glad that you brought up that you were planting tomatoes because not that women can't go do something lavish, have take a day off and go to the spot, whatever you can swing, but you were doing something pretty small, potentially life-giving, very nourishing, maybe you're going to feed your family with the tomatoes, who knows? But I think many women can relate to that feeling of, oh, I should be getting something done for my family. I should be getting some work done. Who am I to be taking this time to just do something? And it can be easy to talk ourselves into this feeling that we're being self-indulgent when we could be, almost checking something off the list or
Yeah.
that kind of talk. And one of the things I really like that you kind of realized during this 40-minute experiment that you share is how good you felt when you were able to get into a little bit more of a childlike, playful state, even with some of these small things. And one of the programs I do with my clients, they get little assignments. And one of them has to do, I'm summarizing here, but one of them has to do with doing something kind of just for fun, almost to cultivate
Mhm.
childlike wonder. And it's the assignment that women have the most problem with. They have to bring their child with them or I mean, it's clear, like, no, do something just for yourself. And people just they have to make it productive sometimes.
Oh, yeah.
They have to, like, do it while they're folding laundry. It's just like and it's supposed to be like 20 minutes. I just feel like this really struck a chord of truth with me in your book
Mm.
because I've seen it in my own clients. So
That's
what
so
yeah.
real. Yeah, that's so real. I think that's why I think play and how we engage with that and how we imagine that in our lives, it's so revealing. It's really crucial because of that very thing. So I think, for the women that experience that, I'm like, it's so heartbreaking on one end, like, oh my goodness, like we're just talking about 20 minutes of like some fun thing for yourself. But I think it's why it's so important is because that is so revealing, right? When you hit that moment and you're like me and with the tomatoes, like, oh dang, like that's kind of an intense reaction to something it feels a little disproportionate, right? Like why is this happening? Where does this come from? And, I think when you can have that awareness to think like, "Oh, interesting. Where does this come from? What messages have I just sort of taken in blindly that I maybe wanna, like, update and revisit and change for myself?" I think that can be really exciting to consider that, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I love that language choice of revealing because it's like you were able to get to this point, from my understanding, where you're able to just get curious and be like,
Mhm.
maybe this isn't the tape I want running. So I
Yeah.
really appreciated that. The other situation that came up in your book that I feel like is quite relatable is I don't think that many women are taught how to meaningfully connect with what they want. And I think that for some women, I would guess that they might stay on autopilot or slip into even overfunctioning because it's a little scary to be still and actually ask yourself these questions that you talk about in your book. Have you found in this work that people are embarrassed to admit that they don't know what they want? And how do you help women move through that?
Yes. That was the other thing that surprised but didn't surprise me. It was how, yeah, it felt shameful to say. I remember talking to one woman and was like, "I can't believe I don't know this for myself. I feel like I'm the only person that doesn't know this about my life." And I'm like, "No, no, no. It's actually really normal if you want to use that word, or like this happens a lot. It's a lot more common than you think, or that we've been led to believe." That was a huge motivation in even wanting to write on this topic because I wanted people to know, hey, it's not that uncommon. And if you feel stuck, there's nothing to feel embarrassed about. It's just a part of growth. It's just a part of our lives. And yeah, if you stay stagnant, then you don't need to revisit those things. But if you're somebody who is interested in growth and you see that as an important part of your life, then yeah, of course you're going to hit points where you don't know, or it's confusing, or you used to know, but now you aren't so sure, or you're asking questions. And again, I think as women, we're so good at seeing things from multiple sides and considering a lot of things at once. We think a little more connectively, a little more holistically. So, but then because of that, we're thinking not just about what we want, but how that impacts our families or our situations. Or, I had one mom telling me, like, yeah, I'm thinking about this in my career, but I'm also thinking about what does that do to my commute time and how does that work with the carpool? And, it's like these are the things that we think about. And because of that, then it's complex. It's not straightforward. It's not as simple as just being like, figure what you want, go do it.
Yeah.
Like that's so unhelpful actually, because it's a lot more nuanced than that. And I love that you said autopilots. I literally just had someone say that to me. I was like, I think that's such a perfect way to put that. That it's so easy to live life in a way that's on autopilot. But I do think the opposite of that is when you wake up to that and you're like, oh, wait, okay, I get to have some agency. I get to have some creativity. I get to have some, imagination about how I might want to approach life and incorporating what I want. But yeah, it comes sort of at the opposite of just coasting, like being on autopilot, like you said.
You said something in there made me think about how you talk in the book about sometimes whether, I mean, there are financial and practical realities, and I want to address that. And I know you address that in the book, but I think that women are very quick to eclipse their ability to dream and explore desires. And sometimes I think we can kill things too quickly.
Yes, exactly. I think we overestimate what is unrealistic. So, especially if you are someone who's like good at planning and good at those details and good with like, those realities and finances and all the rest, the downside that can come with that is, yeah, we just are very quick to say, that's unrealistic, or that couldn't work out. And so I'm never one to say, don't pay attention to that. I'm not someone who's ever going to tell you to live beyond your means, or, again, like I was raised by my immigrant mother who talked me through what compound interest was on a credit card when I was in grade school. She was like, I'm not going to be like, yeah, just, do whatever. So that's not my style. But I think to your point, we often as women overdo it in the other direction, and what I wanna say is like, "Ooh, can we just hold a little bit more time, a little bit more space for what you might want without dismissing it?" Like, can we just expand the horizon for which we allow ourselves to consider this or be curious about it? Because it can have a lot to say. Even if something is ultimately maybe wildly unrealistic, it can still have something important to say to you. And then also, we might be overestimating what's unrealistic. So you don't want to do that to yourself.
I love that because there's lots of examples in the book where you talked about how our desires, even if they don't come to fruition, have something to tell us.
Yeah.
And so you gave some examples where, okay, you didn't get the dream job you wanted, but what about it did you really want? And what did you learn by even going for it and getting that feedback? I want to make sure we carve out some time to talk about the experimentation process that you delve into in your book, because I thought that that was something helpful and concrete that some women, especially women that maybe eclipse even dreaming too soon, could kind of anchor to.
Mhm.
Experimentation and actually stepping into the doing and getting out of my head and into my heart and getting feedback has been very life-giving for me, and something that allowed
Mm.
me to actually launch a podcast and start a business. So when you wrote it, it really personally struck a chord with me. So let's talk through the four types of experimentation and give some examples, if that's okay, based on either your life or maybe how it's come to life for clients, and how you encourage people to act their way into clarity, maybe instead of
Mm.
just waiting for this moment of certainty that rarely ever strikes for most of us, right?
Yes. Well, I love hearing a bit about your story and how you felt that. So that's so beautiful to me. Yeah, and I think this is so important because, as you said, I think we wait for that clarity. I need to figure out exactly what I want and then I can act on it. But if I don't, then I'm stuck and I'm thinking and I'm thinking and I'm thinking. That's not helpful. And so I'm trying to help people reverse that and to say, actually, action is what creates clarity in your life. So could you figure out some ways to experiment that aren't maybe going to cost you too much time and money, or that feel doable and feel realistic in your life? None of us like finds our perfect pair of jeans by just like staring on them. You have to try them on. You got to go into the dressing room, you got to put them on and see what they feel like and take a look. Same thing with what we want. It's totally okay if you're like, I'm not actually sure if I want to do this. Like, do I want to start a podcast? I don't know. I could see good reasons to do it. I could see good reasons to not do it. Again, that's very human. So, but I think rather than waiting for that perfect, like you said, clarity that may never come, you can actually flip it and find some small ways to take some action that will then be that try on for you to say, oh, this is what I want. This is perfect for me. This is a good fit. Or, oh, no, this isn't. I don't want this, but I learned this about myself instead. So that's the name of the game. I think that's huge if we can figure that out. And you asked about the types of experiments. And I think that's one way to think about it, just to generate ideas. So, one type of experiment is what I call an improvement experiment. So it's taking what you already know or are doing and figuring out, how do I want to improve this? So if it's at work, it could be like, here's my role. How do I want to amplify the things that I love doing? How do I want to maybe minimize the stuff that isn't working for me as well, delegate it or shelve it or make it, more efficient? Basically, how do you amplify what you love about that and downplay what you don't? Basically improving a current situation. So this one is the one that is most familiar to you, most kind of rooted in what you're already experiencing, which, well, I will say, can make it easier for some people because it's closer, it's more concrete, but it can also make it harder. I just had someone say, "Oh, actually, this one was the harder one for me to do because it's what I know." And it's like not that far out. So to think of ideas of how to improve that actually felt a little trickier. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. A different kind of experiment is an environmental experiment. So this is where you take something that is somewhat familiar, but you're trying to put it into a new environment. So the example I can give on this is, I was once working with a woman who's an engineer, and she was like, I don't know if this is for me. I might need to just walk away from engineering. I'm like, okay, well, is it that you don't like engineering, or is that you don't like engineering in this context? Because she was a younger woman, she was in a very male dominated, well, engineering is a very male dominated field. And the particular firm that she was at was also very male led, very male dominant, and their work styles were not very collaborative and such. And so, the question then became, again, do you not like engineering, or do you not like engineering in this context? And would you be happier in a female led firm or in a place that
Mm.
had a more collaborative culture? And sure enough, as she started to explore other options, like, oh, okay, what could that look like? What could that mean? She found the perfect situation. She's an avid birder, like she goes on birding trips, like on her free time. She found a job working for the Cornell Lab of Ornithology as an engineer. And I was like, that's Perfect. So that's a beautiful, one of my favorite examples of an environmental experiment because it was like, yeah, you're keeping the root of some things, but you're finding a better environment for it. The other type is a new lane, something's brand new. For I imagine for you, maybe podcasting was that like something new to you, don't have any experience in, but you're kind of curious about. So sometimes this is like going back to school or making a career change into a new field or a new fun creative venture, something like writing oriented or something that's, been of interest to you. But those are bigger changes to make. But if you're thinking of it with an experimental mindset, you can say, okay, well, who do I know that has done this? Who do I know that has gone back to grad school in the programs I'm interested in? Could I have a 30-minute coffee with them to ask them their experience? Like, yes. See, then that becomes very doable. And what you're doing in that is you're noticing yourself in the middle of that, like, ooh, what of that would I like too? Or what of that would I not? Or again, to use your great example, what do you know about podcasting? Could you do an hour of research on the internet on YouTube to say, like, what does it take to start a podcast? And how does that sound to me? What do I like about that? What do I not like? Again, you can find ways to shrink these experiments to make them doable so that it's not like it has to be only the version of experimenting that's like, I go back to grad school for 3 years and spend however many tens of thousands of dollars. You can find ways to make it bite size. That gives you clues. And then the last one I always tell people to do is a wild dream experiment. So it's like if someone, you open up your door tomorrow morning and someone had dropped off a magic wand for you, like you opened it and saw that, like, what would you do? What would you create for yourself? And this is the one that's most untethered from your reality. So it can be by nature, just kind of wild, kind of out there, but it's really fun to see what comes up when you ask yourself that question because sometimes it's, people will tell me my wild dream is to open my own bookstore or my wild dream is to lay on a beach and never have to think about work again in my life or my wild dream is to, live in this city or to and again it kind of goes to what you were asking about with the what's realistic, what's not realistic. Even if it's not, it still can tell you a lot. It can still have a lot to say about what you're longing for. Like, the person who told me, I just want to lay on a beach and never think about work again. Like, okay, well, that's, if you don't have the finances for that, it's probably not the realistic, but what's behind that? And for her, it was like, I'm really dangerously close to burnout. My
Mm.
work situation is not working for me. It's really toxic. I don't know how much longer I can. Okay, great. How do you work with that? How do you listen to that and pay attention to that? And I will also say that when I did this exercise for myself like 5 years ago or wherever, the thing I wrote down was I want to write a book someday. And I didn't know what I wanted to write about or how that would happen or anything, but that was what popped up when I asked myself that question. So I always like to tell people, you never know. Like you don't know sometimes what is and isn't possible. And sometimes there's much more abundance and possibility than we think at first, especially, I get it. Like when you're thinking of something new like that, it's very natural to feel a little bit uncertain and unsure of those things, but you never know. So I'll stop there. Those are the kind of experiments I love to encourage people to think about multiple ones at once because I think sometimes that surfaces different thinking than just feeling like you can only limit yourself to one of those pockets. And it's really fun to see what comes up.
I love all of that. I'm actually going to reflect that back to you just so people, because I'm sure people are like maybe parking their car and writing in a note, like, okay, so the improvement experiment I love because I feel like for the person who is overwhelmed and feels like, "Oh, I don't know if I have time to like even tackle my desires." I'm using language that this person that I've encountered would probably use. I like how without really changing their circumstances, they can change their lives. I love the example of working in a company because sometimes I've found you can change jobs without changing your job. And I think people forget that. And I know you talk about zone of genius, and I feel like just getting aware of where you feel like you're thriving and what you look forward to, and taking a step back and being like, how can I do more of this? Because sometimes it's not at someone else's expense. Sometimes there's other people that love the other type of work, and it's just a better fit for you in the company.
Yeah. Because we don't all love the same things.
Yeah.
And if you don't know that, then you can think, well, I don't want to be a jerk. I don't want to make someone else do something I hate. But Exactly. Like sometimes the very thing that you hate, someone else is like, I love that. That's my favorite thing that I wake up excited to do. And you're like, oh, that's amazing. You're a great team. Yeah.
Yeah, especially if you're teetering on burnout, letting go and releasing tasks that don't energize you can maybe at least be a stop valve a little bit, give you a little reprieve. Environment, you said in the book, I mean, basically like having your dream house in the wrong neighborhood might be less of the dreamy scenario than you envisioned. So I just wanted to reflect back that, yeah, sometimes discerning, I love that story of the engineer because
Mm.
discerning the work from the environment is major.
It's huge because I want to say more often than not, actually, environment is a bigger factor than we give it credit for. And we lump it all together and we think, oh, well, this is engineering. Like, well, no, a portion of that is engineering, but a big portion of it is actually how you're reacting to the environment. So this is especially important if you're ever in a sort of toxic work scenario where the environment is actually really bad. Then it's really important all the more to separate like what is the actual role that you're doing and what are you reacting to that's your job responsibilities and what is it that's the bad environment around you.
Yeah. And then with New Lane, this one, I love that you brought up that we could potentially explore different experiments at the same time because I think sometimes people are like, have a very all or nothing, black and white, rigid attitude about starting something new. Like they have to be all in
Yeah.
or, quit the job and I'm going to be an artist now. And then that actually can be a ton of pressure. I feel like tiptoeing, well, maybe you still have the stability. I think that sometimes it can cause people to feel a lot more pressure to succeed if they don't like ease into something. Not that, hey, if you've got a vision and you want to make a bold move, I'm all for it. But I feel like sometimes people make no moves because of the circumstances in their life. So I just love that invitation to get feedback in the smallest
Mhm.
of ways. And then with the wild dreams, I love that because I feel like sometimes women just forget that they can even ask themselves those questions. And even if it's something that's like irrelevant to what they're doing, I feel like there's some kernel of truth in there, right? Is that what
Definitely.
you found?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, I remember hearing about a mom who was like, "Oh, I wish I could take 2-week vacation, fancy resort, bring my whole family." It was like, "Okay, that's not feasible." But like, what's underneath that? Oh, you
Mm.
just want some quality time with your loved ones, with your family to make memories together. Like, okay, well, yeah, you maybe can't afford the luxury version of that, but you could what she ended up doing was finding a friend who had a cabin and they could go there as a family, and again, it's like, oh, it's hitting the core kernel of what was speaking to you in that, but it wasn't like how it initially presented itself. So again, I think if you have curiosity, if you give yourself some space to play with it and say like, what is this saying to me? Like, what if I listen to it, what does it want to tell me about what I really need or what I'm longing for? I think that can be really much more generative than just it's not possible, right? Like what
Yeah.
that's the other
Like,
option is you just shut it down and move on and try to talk yourself out of it, but that's not there's another author who says, like, "You want what you want." Like, so you might as well be honest with yourself. You might as well her name's Emily P. Freeman. I love her take on this. It's like, it's there. So you might as well listen to it and pay attention to it because it doesn't go away just because you try to shut it down.
yeah. I also know that fear of disappointment keeps people from pursuing what they want. How can we process disappointment in a way that kind of strengthens our connection to desires?
Yeah, this is something that comes up a lot. So maybe one of the most common kind of initial barriers is people say, "Well, I don't want to think about that, or I don't want to pin my hopes on something because what if it doesn't happen and then I'm disappointed?" So the thing I talk about with this is, we talk about pain tolerance, and those of us that have birthed humans, we have thought about this, right? I remember being in like labor class and like holding a piece of ice or something to test like our pain tolerance. But I think when we're delving into this realm and with this kind of work, it's really important to think about uncertainty tolerance. Like how much uncertainty do you have the capacity to tolerate? Because if it's not very high, you're not going to be able to really enter in. But if you build that up, if you gained those skills to know how to deal with this, then I think then that can show you that, yes, disappointment, it's terrible. It's very painful. So it's not to minimize that, but it doesn't have to be the end all be all either. Like if you know how to pay attention to disappointment, then it can be something that brings you closer to what you want rather than like that's the end of the story. And that was my story, that was my journey. But again, yeah, I think a lot of times just the mere thought of it is like, "Oh, no, I won't be able to handle that." And I wanna tell people, "No, you can. You can handle this." It's very painful. Like, again, I will say that. But it doesn't have to end you. You can figure out how to deal with it, and if you know how to listen to it, actually will bring you closer to what you want, and if you can find ways to deal with so, in the book, I talk about how a mentor gave me the best advice I ever heard on disappointment was like, get specific about why you're disappointed. What did you want in that opportunity or in that thing? And the more specific you can be to name it, the more that helps you then realize, oh, this thing I wanted, it was a road to those things, but the desire is something separate. And I could look at three other roads to get there. And that starts to open up a really cool way of learning how to interact with disappointment or things like that, or unexpected things in our journey to be able to say like, "Ooh, we can adapt to this. We can figure out our way through it." So, I always tell people, yeah, if you're really going for what you want, you probably will encounter disappointment at some point, but it's worth it. There are worse things than disappointment. Keeping yourself small, distance from yourself, living on autopilot, I would argue those are much worse things than having to weather some disappointment here and there.
I full heartedly agree. I always like to give women something specific that they can try. And I wondered if maybe you could speak either into your 100 desires exercise or any other kind of practical exercise that someone who feels a little stuck or stagnant on connecting with their desires might be able to practice in the coming weeks.
Yeah, I think the 100 Desires one is a good one. So in the book, there's a lot of different practical exercises to kind of unearth these things. One of them is called 100 Desires, where the task is getting a pen and paper out, writing down 100 things that you want. Not editing, not minimizing yourself, not trying to dismiss it, but you just go with it. You don't overthink it, you write it down. The purpose of 100 is it's like such opposite energy from what we normally do, which is like, let's make it as small as possible. Let's make it inconvenient. It's going purposely in the opposite direction. And if you're trying to get to 100, then it forces you to not erase things too quick and you just like sit with it. So you don't have to do 100 technically. Sometimes that number stresses people out. So I don't want to say like, you don't need to like make yourself nervous about it, just being expansive. If that feels like too much, you can even do a more condensed version, which is set a timer for 3 minutes, write down everything that you want that comes to mind, and then just notice what that was like for you. Is that easy? Is that hard? Did it feel exciting? Did it feel scary? So not only are you noticing what shows up on the list and what that has to say, I have people sometimes tell me, "Ooh, I was sort of surprised. I did not realize I wanted that." Like, "Oh, that's cool." It could be big, it could be small, it could be like, "I wanna eat more tacos." It could be, it could be anything. So notice what is on there, and also, like I said, notice what was it like for you? Was it super easy? Was it super hard? Why do you think that is? What tapes again, back to that sort of idea, do you notice playing when you do that, and why? So all of that I think can be a great exercise and a good place to start.
That's fun, and I feel like for some reason, springtime just feels like a fun time to do that
Yeah,
and
that's so true.
explore. I always like to close with a chance for reflection. So I'm wondering in this area of experiencing that magic of knowing what we want and reconnecting with our own desires as women, what's one question women could be asking themselves more?
I think to be asking yourself, we talked a lot about how it can feel like no, paying attention to what we want as women, it feels like it comes at the expense of other people or comes at the expense of people that we care about. But I think a reflection that I would want to leave folks with is to say, but if you did pay attention to what you wanted and you lived into that magic, how could it actually benefit the people you love and the things that you care about? How could that actually be a good thing for you to be living your most authentic, most alive self? What would that look like in the world? And how could that actually be a good thing?
Beautiful. I know that my listenership is going to want to find you and support your work and read your book. So, where can we find all of the Tracey G handles and websites and everything?
Love it. Love it. The book is anywhere you want to buy a book. So she's out there. She's everywhere. Wherever is your favorite place to get a book. I'm probably most active on Instagram. So my handle is at traceyg.me, M-E, TRACEYGE.me. And I like to chat on there, like to connect. So if folks want to ask a question, that's great. I also have a goal setting template, and I agree with you that spring is a really fun time to do it. And so if you sign up for my newsletter, there's a template and a method of doing that I like to recommend to folks. It's called the 3x5 method. And that's a fun way to engage with goal setting, like from the lens of like, what do I want? What feels good to me? What, is the way that I want to approach this. And you can find that on my website, which is also my name, traceyg.me.
Wonderful. This was so lovely to connect with you. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much for having me. It was lovely to be with you.
I'm so glad you joined me today. If you're looking for more, feel free to connect with me on Instagram at @WhitneyWoman. And if you enjoyed the show, I invite you to support me by leaving a review or sharing it with a friend. Hope you have an inspired day.